Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Awareness Podcast, Living the Non-Dual Understanding with your host, Bill Free. And I'm very happy and honored to have a friend and a professional join with me today on the podcast. I know you're going to love Jiffy Reed. Welcome, Jiffy.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me here.
Well, I'm happy to have you here, Jiffy. I knew immediately that I wanted you on the podcast after we did our bit on the Being Myself book study, and you were one of the co-hosts. And of course, you've been on previous book study experiences where we share, one of the non-dual books, Rupert's books mostly. And then when I realized how far you've come from your training in psychology and integrating that, sort of mixing that that understanding with the non-dual understanding, and then with your Course in Miracles background, I went, oh my God, how can I not have you back on the podcast? Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity. Well, actually, I appreciate the way you are able to help draw out for me all these various aspects of things that I've learned and synthesized. And because it's really fun when we talk together, I'm able to just bring all this together. And you're able to sort of guide me in a way that I just feel like I'm picking things out of the air and then putting them together in ways that I hadn't thought of before. So it's a lot of fun interacting with you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jiffy. Now, Jiffy, it just for you that are listening or watching, Jiffy is a psychotherapist, and how can she not put the pieces together to help people to sort of come to understand what's going on in their own psyche experience. And Jiffy, if someone wanted to get in touch with you after the show, after listening to the show, how would they find you?
Best way is to reach me at jiffyread@gmail.com. jiffyread@gmail.com. Super simple.
Super simple. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I met Jiffy at a Rupert Spira retreat in Garrison, New York. I don't know, probably 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And we connected. We might have met a couple of times at that retreat. Did we, Jiffy?
I think we did. Yep.
Yeah, I think we met a couple of times. I found out you were a Course in Miracles student and Rupert student, which caught my attention because I really was interested in the Course community and Rupert community, sort of people that knew both the progressive path and the non-dual direct path, so that I could kind of talk to somebody that was on the same sort of the same track as I was experienced. And you were one of them. And I also visited your home. We met at your home in Massachusetts before you moved, and I attended one of your Course in Miracles groups. You remember that?
That's right. I had forgotten that until now. That was a great night.
That was really great. And I think you've sold that house and moved since then, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Yeah.
I'm no longer there. And I'm not holding meetings anymore. When I sold the house, it was just time for another chapter in my life. So which that was an ongoing group. We'd met for years. It was a really special group.
Yeah. Well, it was, that background or the backstory of our connection. It sort of gives an understanding for the audience to see that you're not just someone I picked out of the air. You're someone that I really hold a great respect for, and I know that our audience will enjoy having known that. And I think for this conversation, what would be great would be if you would tell, I don't know the the real background of how you came to non-duality, but what brought you to the teaching of non-duality and Rupert Spira and others?
So I had gone through a period in my life when I went into a deep depression, and I didn't have therapy for that. I sensed that it was an existential crisis. And so I managed to find my way out of that depression and found myself just like full bore on in seeking mode to try and figure out like what's going on here. I had had some experiences in my life where I realized that reality as I knew it and as I had been, taught to think of it, that there was more going on than I was aware of and that others were aware of. And so I was looking for answers. And that led me into a path of looking into, reincarnation, the whole spirit world. And I fell into Zen Buddhism, not as a practicing Buddhist, but just in terms of the philosophy. And that really resonated for me because I found that very grounding, very reality based, but was still deeply connected with this spiritual core. In fact, Zen helped me access that even more. Because I was having experiences that couldn't be explained from, the scientific paradigm. And from that, I found Course in Miracles because I was looking for a way to synthesize sort of the teachings of Zen plus the spirituality that I was naturally experiencing. And somebody mentioned that they were working for a teacher who was doing Course in Miracles, and my ears went boop, 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 boop. And I immediately bought the book and I just dove into it. I read the book 4.5 times, and the halfway through my fifth time, I said, "Okay, got this." Closed it, and it helped to reveal so much to me. It helped me to understand the working of the mind in a certain way. But there was something that was missing. There was one little piece that was missing that I couldn't find the answer to in A Course in Miracles, and that's when Rupert came into my life. I was just, cruising YouTube one day and there was a video, clicked on it and I went, oh my God, I know this person has that missing piece. And it turned out he was giving a retreat, I think in 3 weeks. And I signed up and that was it. Went to the retreat, got that piece, and continued going because I just loved the community and I loved the teaching and it allowed me to deepen in there. But that was sort of my path through
Nice.
to
Well,
non-duality.
that is wow. You could give a great. I mean, you actually just did a great elevator speech on that question. That was awesome. Thank you. And so this is my curiosity. When you looked at the course, the Christian language, did it help you? Was it a surprise to you? Did you have some religious understanding before you picked up the Course in Miracles?
It was a huge problem for me. And, I instantly, it was like Christ and God, I was okay with at that point. I was an atheist for quite a while. I grew up in a, atheist / agnostic home. But here's how we were in my family culture regarding church. I was a horseback rider, and on weekends, I'd go off to horse shows. And I remember, sometimes on Sundays, we'd go by a church in our town on the way to a horse show. And my mother would turn to me and say, aren't you glad we're not church people? and, and now, then I became a church person and then I became a spirituality person. And so it's sort of ironic, but I had no exposure to religion or spirituality or any sort of faith growing up. But I'm steeped in New England Protestant culture. And so even though I didn't have any background in it or formal education in it, I knew there was this guy named Jesus, and I knew that he was crucified on this cross and that somehow it was supposed to atone for man's sins, and God sent his only son to have him suffer. And that made no sense to me whatsoever. And yet I saw people for whom it touched something inside them. And I said, okay, there's something to this, but what I'm being told about it doesn't fit. But I know there's something there because I could see that it was touching something deep inside. So that was actually where my spiritual search really focused, was getting an answer to that question. What is atonement? Like what happened? What was going on there that was so powerful? And when that question was answered, that took a couple of years. It was a couple of years of me having to actually have some of my preconceived notions and beliefs stripped away. Part of that was my, sort of my reaction to words like Christ and God, and I can't remember what the other, the Holy Spirit. Being able to see through those and to see them just as pointers rather than actual sort of tangible entities, and see what they were talking about in terms of a symbol. Those terms as symbolic. Christ consciousness is being representative.
Well, it sounds like you had a similar experience with the course as my wife Lisa Natoli had. She didn't grow up with the Bible. She didn't go to church. Her dad would, when he would have conversations with her, he would say, that we just don't follow all the. I'm not taking my kids to Catholic church or to church because I just don't agree with what they're saying. And he would wake her up in the middle of the night and want to do cool stuff with her, like watch Saturday Night Live when she was a little girl. So he was more open with her, and her conversation with me is very similar to what you just said. And when I found A Course in Miracles, I'd come from 20 plus years of Christianity. So for me, it was an alternative to the Jesus being, accepting Jesus as my Savior. So, or even some of the misinterpretations or the interpretations that the Bible took on that I think were differently. I think they were spoken different by Jesus and by some of the activities that show up in the New Testament. Definitely the Old Testament was more geared at, it was sort of written in the image of man, that man had an image of God, and that's what it looked like. That was my take on it. I couldn't understand how God could make gays and lesbians, make that whole thing an abomination. That made no sense to me at all, how he would pick out people that were doing things. But yet, if you accept Jesus, you're good to go, man. You've got fire insurance. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had that same confusion from my upbringing of how just having a belief in Jesus would somehow absolve you of sins, but that wouldn't be true for people who didn't buy into it. So they're just all these questions. And as I started to read the Course, it just all became clear, because as the Course was pointing to the ineffable behind everything, behind these, the way these symbols had been used, I saw what was there all along that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. And it drew me immediately. It drew me so, it was so compelling. It was a moth directly into the fire. And because I wanted to let go of anything that I thought I knew about anything or God, and just start fresh, brand new. And this Course in Miracles was the way. And it proved out for me. And then, of course, I became a fundamentalist Course in Miracles student, and I needed to let that go. It's sort of like, first I was a fundamentalist Christian and a fundamentalist Course in Miracles person. Then I realized, oh my God, I'm a fundamentalist Course person now. And it didn't take very long before I let that go, and I became interested in Muji and Advaita Vedanta and the teachings of more of the Eastern traditions. And so when I found Rupert, it was after years of following Mooji, going to his ashram, becoming friends with him, and living at the ashram for a while. And then when I found Rupert, I went, oh, my man. He's my man. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the same sort of instant connection for me, or not instant connection, but instant recognition. This is the teaching.
Yes.
This is the teaching. This is. I don't want to say the end of the path, because it's not. It's actually, for me, it was the beginning of the new, a new phase. Um, yeah, I knew that this was the place that I was coming to, that I was then going to be going out into the world again after, years and years of just dedicating this search and sort of following this seeking energy. So I
Yeah.
like what you said. I like what you said about how you had become fundamentalist in the Course in Miracles. And when I did these deep dives, Zen, Course in Miracles, spirituality before all of it, and then Rupert with non-duality, I noticed that I never became fundamentalist. I mean, I would take on that perspective wholly for that time. One of the things, I used to be an equine professional, and when I would train with somebody, I would completely go into their system of teaching and just immerse myself in that teaching. And if there had been some other teaching that contradicted it, I would set that aside and say, okay, maybe there's something for me to learn from this perspective, so I'm going to go all in. So I did the same thing with spirituality and Course in Miracles and non-duality. So luckily, while I was able to immerse myself in it, I was able to do it as a way to access that particular perspective, or, whatever the languaging was and the way of seeing was, while still knowing that I had these other ways that I had made sense of things and been able to come to a place of knowing. And so being able to hold those as well. So I think of non-duality as not being an adherence to one system, but being able to sort of stay open to all these different ways of seeing and knowing that are all valid. And if there is a contradiction, finding where that contradiction is, and maybe there's something that has to be let go of one, but there can still be a holding of the remainder of what's been let go of, if there's still some parts that are useful. So it's this wonderful flowering of rather than holding on to one teaching and coming from that one perspective, being able to hold all these multiple ways of seeing and knowing and navigating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so well put. And I agree that I've come to a place where I have sufficiently let go of the obsessive compulsion to one thing. And as you say, it's the non-dual isn't the end. It's like another beginning. It's like another expansion where you begin to see that everything is related to the pointing. You see it in so many things, even things that aren't particularly spiritual. You see a pointing mechanism involved, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember one day going by a abandoned lot that had all this trash in it. It was just, people had dumped trash there. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that's the most beautiful thing. And I can't even tell you what was beautiful about it, but it was, well, I mean, I suppose I could. It represented us living in the way that we do, and what gets generated as this result of this unsustainable way that we're living. And yet, how could we do anything else? And just being able to take in that lot without judgment and without seeing it as something wrong or bad. I just saw it in the context of the whole history of mankind and of the earth, and how we got to this point, and just how beautiful it was that it was there as a result of everything that came before it. So that became a pointer. That was another way that this was just a pointer to taking it all and being able to hold it all and appreciate it all, accept it all, while at the same time, being able to navigate and take action if there's action for me to take, which in this case there wasn't. But had there been, I have no doubt that that would have been made available and obvious to me, and I would have taken action
Yeah.
to do what
Right.
might have been done.
Yeah. Well, and I know that recently, in the last few years, you've gone from, I'm not sure what your last profession was, but you just recently finished your master's degree in psychology, right?
I finished my master's degree in mental health counseling. So I'm not a psychologist, but I'm a psychotherapist. And
Okay.
yeah, so I sort of did a little bit of a backward journey where instead of becoming a psychotherapist and then discovering non-duality, I discovered non-duality. But I knew, again, as I went to Rupert, because something was missing from A Course in Miracles, or I just wasn't getting something that I needed to help me to sort of complete my understanding as it was for what I was investigating in the world of spirituality. When I sort of felt like I was done with non-duality, when I say done, like didn't need that teaching anymore, I knew that there was something more I needed to learn. And so becoming a therapist was the next step in my education. I wanted to know, like, how does the mind work on a relative level in terms of us being here in this world. I really appreciated that with non-duality, there was that recognizing the self and recognizing phenomena that arises within the mind as being just phenomena within the mind. But at the same time, I was watching people struggle with their lives and watching myself struggle with my life in some areas, and not finding not finding that the non-dual understanding was particularly useful for addressing some of that. And so diving into psychology and learning about the way the mind works as the field currently understands it enabled me to start working with myself and with, help other people in my life in ways that were really useful. And so it just adds another layer into my understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're actually it's almost like you started as an observer of the psyche, of the psychology, and of the seeming illusory nature of humanity or personhood. And now you've gone into that space to sort of help people where they think they are, correct?
That's such a great way to put it. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. And also I have such an appreciation for how our minds, the working of our body mind is designed to survive. I mean, here we are in this experience, and we're working with a physical, organism that's designed to survive, which makes sense because otherwise we wouldn't survive in this environment, and we wouldn't continue as a species. So it's interesting because now we're talking on the relative level. Is there a material world? Well, that's a question that with non-duality would have a very different focus from the one I'm bringing. But I saw people struggling with the way their body minds were responding to certain triggers in their environment based on how their wiring had developed based on past experiences. And with non-duality, I saw that there was a way to address that. But I also saw that in psychotherapy, there are some really great targeted interventions that could just go right into those places where mind wasn't functioning in an optimal way, and really help to shift that. So it gave me an appreciation for psychotherapy as well as being able to still hold the non-dual understanding, and to be able to realize that, if I was just going into the non-dual understanding as a therapist, I felt like I would be in a duality. There's non-dual understanding, and then there's the world of psychotherapy. And again, I wanted to really hold multiple levels and layers of understanding in my work. And so it was a great all of them are just great complements for each other
Yeah, yeah,
in
I
my
can see
work.
that. I am curious because I've heard that you have to be under your licensing as a psychotherapist. You have to be careful not to use religious or spiritual or those kinds of terms in your counseling. How do you get around that?
Well, if I do bring up anything that has to do with non-duality, I do it in a very secular way. I will talk about um, I'll talk about just how we have an essential part of ourself that can notice these other parts within us, or that can notice phenomena within us, such as thoughts and feelings and sensations. And so there's the thought, and there's the feeling, and there's the sensation, but then there's that deeper part of us that is actually noticing those things, and that deeper part of us is stable over time. It hasn't disappeared, it hasn't changed. The same part that's noticing that is the same part that we referred to as, myself when we were young, when we were middle aged. And it's the same part that's going to be referring to the self when we're older. And so that's it's a really simple way of just being able to talk about non-duality, or introduce the concept of non-duality without ever having to say non-duality. And
Right,
in and
right.
in some ways, I've let go of non-duality in terms of languaging, and just gone to the simple understanding of what our internal experience really is.
Yes, yes. And what's cool about that, what you just described with a client, you can prove that you can prove to them for themselves, they can have their own evidence of what you're saying to be accurate, because it's not because they're believing you, it's because you can point them to seeing something in a true seeing that they can't deny, or there's nowhere to go. Once
Yeah.
someone sees their essential nature, sees it as an experience, you can't unsee that.
Hmm. Yeah. I do have to confess that I've sort of pulled away from doing that with clients, just because I find that then I have to start bringing in a concept of um, self versus ego. And a lot of the clients I see just aren't at that stage yet. And so the non-dual understanding for me, it helps to inform me about sort of the underlying processes that are going on. And I hold that knowing that I'm sitting with a person who thinks they're something other than they are. And I might never even articulate this to them, but as I see them, I'm seeing their true self, absent of sort of the dysfunction of ego. And meanwhile, there's this, dysfunction that's going on within them, intrapsychic dysfunction, and I can see through that, and also at the same time be able to find interventions for that. So how it's really helped me lately is to be able to sort of be that anchor point for who I know them to be, and that then translates. They're able to feel that. We're able to feel when someone is holding that part of us. It's why being in the presence of a spiritual teacher who's really grounded can be so powerful, because we're being grounded in that.
Yes. Wow, I can't believe you're saying this. I was on a WhatsApp call 3 hours ago with someone that's in UK who does psychocranial cranial sacral therapy.
Sacral
And
cranial therapy. Yeah.
yeah, and she is telling me that she is using this. All of a sudden, she's getting this experience, this understanding of sharing this, of healing people. People are being referred to her. She's not looking for business, but people that she's talking to about this to. She's being referred to for with clients, and she's just seeing people, and she's remotely having an effect on these people with this skill that's being sort of dropped into her. It sounds like I mean, and you're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Your knowing presence is having a healing effect, and there's no words necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this is why I can't remember what the saying is, but I'm going to be really paraphrasing this. You know, a guru meditating in a cave is having no less effect on the world than someone who's actively, you know, out there campaigning for peace. Us, an individual, any of us, anchoring in our own being, the knowing of our own being. And it doesn't have to be this conceptual knowing of our own being. It doesn't have to be the non-dual understanding. It's just being anchored in one's own self, where there's that inner core of peace and stillness radiates outward into the world. It does. I mean, we're not separate from one another. We're not in a field of individual separate selves. We're part of one thing. So of course it has an effect, just as when we have disturbance within ourselves, when we get caught up in our own internal dramas, and then that, you know, ends up spilling out into an external situation, that has an effect as well. And so I really very carefully cultivate peace within myself. Not cultivate peace within myself because it's already there. But I'm very disciplined about what I allow my mind to focus on. And it's not that I'm denying things that are there that need my attention, but I'm just really careful to take whatever does arise and say, you know, is this something that I need to work on? Is there some work here for me to do? Is there something I haven't seen, some shadow side? Or is this just something that my mind's going off into something, and that's a thing I don't need to get involved with. And for me, it really is a practice, you know, a live, active practice, and it's been really extraordinary for me to see how grounding that is, and how much I am able to have agency over myself and over my mind, and where it chooses to go, and where I bring it back, and just bring everything back into myself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I totally connect with that understanding. And it seems like this is where the non-dual understanding is sort of the true direct path, non-dual understanding. It brings you to the place where you know that primary position of being is established, and that anchoring position is unchanged. It's unchanging. It's permanent. It's eternal. It's what would be referred to as eternal present. And if you can rely on that, and then all of the other activities of life, no matter what is happening, it, it happens, and this is undisturbed by anything else that happens. Mm-hmm. So for me, that really, besides all the different descriptions, different styles of what is called non-duality, the essential pointing of non-duality is the oneness that you're speaking of, that we're all one essence.
It's interesting because and I use the term oneness, but even that doesn't quite capture it. It's more of the dissolving of there being anything else, of there being any separation, there being any differentiation. Yes. So of course there's the appearance of differentiation. Yes. But I notice that when I come back to myself and, you know, anchor back into myself, and notice that I've gone off somewhere, it's not even that I'm coming back to oneness. It's that it's just all resolving as non-differentiation.
Yeah, isness. Maybe
Isness.
maybe it could be isness, and maybe that's even too many words, right? I mean, it's just
But I like that. That's closer
yeah.
to me to describing it, isness, because it is, there is an isness there. So I think that's a good term to use.
Yes, thank you. And would you say that psychotherapy is moving in the direction of a consciousness model?
Definitely. There are some therapies that are actively discovering that there's this core self, um, and that what arises that becomes problematic are just these sort of identities, these like minor identities that can end up taking us over and seeming like we are this behavior and we are this cluster of thoughts and feelings. And so it's really interesting to see how this understanding is coming into the world of therapy. And people are starting to sort of discover non-duality via these therapies. An example is internal family systems therapy, which the founder, Dick Schwartz, he was working with some people who had some really severe issues. And he realized that these people were experiencing these internal parts of themselves, these parts that were oftentimes warring with each other, or trying to, push each other out of the way, or trying to protect vulnerable parts within the person's psyche. And as he started to learn how to work with these parts and to get these parts to sort of back off a little bit so that they weren't overwhelming the system, what emerged was self with a capital S, as he puts it. But what he was landing on was, isness, the basic isness of a person, and that basic isness could then help these parts to take on more functional roles. So it wasn't a matter of trying to change the behavior. It was a matter of seeing where these parts were trying to solve a problem in a way that wasn't helping. And then the more, the language, the self part with a capital S was able to then work with reorganizing the system.
Yeah.
And then through that, for Dick Schwartz, what emerged was just a realization that there's even more beyond that. So he came to the non-dual understanding in a way through this parts work, which just arose organically when he was working with these patients.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it is coming into the world.
Yep, it is. And to describe it, I would call that the primary self, the unchanging primary self, the thing that is that one can find as they can find themselves established in this primary self that sees the thoughts and knows it's not the thoughts, it's aware of the thoughts, or it's aware of the experience. The experience can change. It can be a different color, a different formulation of ideas and circumstances, and yet that which is aware of it, it changes not.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, you can realize that these reactionary experiences, they used to be able to trigger you, but now you have a new tool to work with.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that, because I find that people get confused, especially people who come from non-duality, who have this idea that there is the I am, pure consciousness, pure awareness. And so in talking about things like, the self, and this self that can help to organize parts to work in a cohesive, integrated way, it can be very confusing to someone who says, well, wait a minute, self is just that undifferentiated, pure awareness. And so I like to say that there's a continuum where on one side we've got pure awareness, and you can, you can then go to before pure awareness, and that's a rabbit hole, though we're not going to go down that. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got sort of disappearance into a ego identity, and into an aspect of ego identity, into a belief in a false self. And this is a continuum. So you've got pure awareness, and within IFS, they talk about self with a capital S. That's just, sort of this side of pure awareness, where self is starting to take on the ability to have qualities such as compassion and curiosity and caring. And so it's just this side of pure awareness that is sort of clear and pure and pristine and absent discernible qualities. And then moving towards that, you can then start to get into, sort of what we call healthy ego functioning, or, a self of one's self as a person in the world who is able to navigate the world in a successful way in terms of relationships and being able to care for oneself. And then that can go into unhealthy functioning, which is where you get into the, sort of the pathology. And so I just want to clarify that, because I know that people really struggle with that. Well, how can I be this self who has these qualities of loving and caring and such, but there's pure self which doesn't have that. So hopefully that clarifies things.
Well, I thought that was brilliant. Thank you for that clear understanding, because it is easy to blur that distinction. And I see it. I see that I can say something and even imply that it's awareness. And which awareness is it? Is it the pure awareness that doesn't have, it has no phenomenal qualities, it just is? Or is it that awareness that has functionality in a bodysuit? And I call that awakening awareness, or that sort of it's on the continuum. It's not pure awareness, but it's this awareness that is in the functioning aspect of, and it's not a true thing. You may not get Rupert to say that, or you may not say that. So this would be my sort of general way of describing how the self works. And even when you hear the term the observer, I'm sure you've heard that many times. That's that's a step away from being the person in the totally embedded and amalgamated with the experience. You can step back away from that just a little bit, just to give a hint that the observer is, so that helps people to step away just a little bit. Do you see?
Yeah, to give just that little bit of space that can sometimes be all that's needed to unhook from that loss into that identity.
Yeah. So it does, you have to be open to, okay, so what words can be used to convey this idea, so that to support someone so that they can untether from the experience that has so pulled them in and caused the suffering that they're experiencing.
Yeah. And one thing I also want to speak for is the suffering doesn't mean, pulling away from the suffering doesn't necessarily mean that you get to escape the pain. I mean, pain, and I'm thinking of the pain of sadness, the pain of grief, the pain of loss, the pain of disappointment they're not mistakes, and they're not things that we can avoid. That's part of life. And it can be really easy to try and avoid those things. And what usually happens is one goes into spiritual bypassing within spiritual circles. It's easy to bypass really difficult emotions. What I've found is I've gone through my journey and have gotten a deeper understanding of the mind and incorporated it with non-duality. I've been through some painful experiences somewhat recently where I was able to move through those experiences, stay anchored in my core self-awareness, while at the same time also having the experience, being in the thoughts and the sensations and the feelings, feeling the pain, letting it process, letting it metabolize. But if I ever came close to losing myself, knowing here's where I am and here's what I'm experiencing, and not denying the experience, not trying to get rid of it, and not trying to make it be anything different from what it was. And in fact, being more in it, because it's part of my being in this manifested world, and it's part of my feeling the joy and the sorrow and the richness of experience. And so where we get stuck is when there is a sense that this shouldn't be happening. We get a sense of there's something wrong with me that this is happening. Might be that shame gets activated, or a sense of core inadequacy gets activated. But being able to stay anchored in that self and knowing this is happening, and this is an expression of sadness or grief, loss, and then being able to see those other things that tend to kind of get piled on with them, such as shame and inadequacy, and saying, oh, that's here too, and I can hold that as well. And then that tends to dissolve those aspects of the experience, and then just leave the pure bittersweet emotions of sadness and grief and loss, disappointment.
Yes. Well, would you say that your role as a therapist has helped you to understand and work with those experiences better?
I think actually an experience I had when I was 16 years old has really been what informed me about that. When I was 16, I lost my dad unexpectedly. And sorry, my dog has to come in. She's on hospice care, so she gets a little crazy sometimes.
Come on in. Come on in. Here. Welcome to the show.
So yeah, when I was 16, I didn't grieve for the longest time. I was just numb. And then one night, just the grief came rushing in. I mean, it poured in. There was no way I was going to be able to hold it back. I was ready to process it. And I remember just feeling so overwhelmed and taken down with the enormity of the grief, and feeling like this huge, just bottomless hole opened up, and I was going down, down, down. And I fell and I fell and I fell, and there was grief and there was grief. And then all of a sudden it just shifted. And I was just there with my own being, just in this place that was so pristine and just pure. And realizing, oh my gosh, I fell down and beyond that, sort of out the other side of it. And I realized I needed to have that fall into grief to then come into contact with my own self that was intact, that had no problem with what had happened, and that was there, and that I was that. And there was nothing that I needed to do, and that this process had done what it needed to do, and that I gave myself over to it and didn't fight it, helped to facilitate me coming to that place. And as I talk about it now, I still remember so clearly that sense of wonder as just the grief dropped away, and I was just there in this clean, immaculate place, knowing myself as always being there for my own self.
Wow. That sounds like a 16-year-old awakening experience.
Yeah, it was. It really was. It's one of those things that I've just kind of, that has been there with me. That experience has been there with me through my whole life since then.
Yes. So good. Oh my God. That's like a university degree in self awareness and awakening, and also watching the whole experiencing the grief, watching it occur and dissolve, and still realize yourself. That sounds a little bit like almost sounds like Brahmana Maharshi when he was 17 and he wanted to die. Or he thought he was dying. It sounds like that's a pretty profound experience you just described.
I had never connected it to that, but as you say that, that makes sense. It is like that. And as I was going through the grief, there wasn't there was a sense of watching it while also being in it. So there was a sense not of being an observer to it, but of being it,
Yeah.
and knowing that I was I'm not going to be able to articulate it, but I want to clarify, there was no separation when I was in that grief. There was no separation. There was no sense of watching it and being separate from it. There was a sense of both being observer and the observed. That's the way to put it.
Yes.
I was both the observer of the grief and I was the grief, both at the same time. Yeah.
Yes. And you are the awareness that gives that gives the event to the mind of memory.
Mm-hmm.
So all
Yeah.
of those.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
I'm a little bit jealous. I didn't get anything like that when I was 16. That's pretty cool. Well, what would you say besides that? That sounds like a life event that changes your trajectory. Would you say it had a longer term or a more uh, characteristic effect on your life from that?
It informed my life. It has continued to inform my life. When I'm sitting with someone who's experienced a loss or is afraid of experiencing a loss, I mean, that's just, I'm anchored there. And so I
Oh,
can
yeah.
hold whatever it is that's there for another person.
Yeah.
But something that really changed my life and actually kickstarted my whole seeking, um, was when I was at a competition one time. I was at a horse competition and I was competing at the international level. So I was competing at a really high level. And I remember the morning of the day that I was going to be engaged in the most dangerous part of the sport. I was a 3-day event rider, the same sport that Christopher Reeve got paralyzed competing in. Anyway, I was walking my horse. We weren't scheduled to go until later in the afternoon, so I took her out of her stall and I was walking her along a stand of like a hedgerow, and all of a sudden this beautiful light just like opened up and shone down, and there was this immaculate yellow butterfly, and then this auditory voice said, and it came from deep inside my head, it said, "Somebody dies today." And I thought, oh no, is it me? And then here's the interesting thing. I thought, oh my God, I'm not freaked out that a voice just spoke to me. At this point, I was an atheist, so I had no context for something like this. But my first reaction was that this was a message and somebody was going to die, and I needed to be concerned as to whether it was me, because I had a young daughter at home, a little toddler daughter. I just lost my mother. And so, I had responsibilities, and I had lost friends to this sport before. And so I was properly concerned. And so I spent the next couple hours just, thinking, should I withdraw from the competition? Is it me? Is this a message for me? And then a couple hours later, I happened to be walking by that same stand of hedges, and a voice came and said, "It's not you." A big sigh of relief. I stayed in the competition. I went and rode, had a great ride on the course, got through without any mishap. And as I was finishing, a friend of mine was in the warm-up area, and she went onto the course 20 minutes after I finished. She never made it past the second fence, and she died. She fell, got crushed, and didn't make it. And so that's when I thought, oh my gosh, what is going on here? This voice knew something was going to happen. How does that happen? I mean, time is this linear thing. There's no way something like this can happen. So that was one question. And who was that voice? Was it my mother talking to me? What's going on here? And so that really catapulted my spiritual search. That was the life-changing moment in terms of setting me out on a course to find out, what is the what's going on? What is reality?
Wow. That's another wow. 2 wows in a row. Oh my God. Well, we only have 4 minutes left. Do you have time to say who's the voice?
It's the voice I needed to hear. It's the event I needed to have to start me on my search, to come to know my own true being and to come to know the world as it is, so that I could open myself to it and to myself and to love and to everything. That was the moment that really drove me in that direction to get to where I am now. So I don't identify that voice as being anything or anyone. One of the things I ended up doing was becoming an animal communicator at one point and learning to tap into animals that were both alive and also that had passed, and being able to access information that was needed to help them, or to get whatever information was needed. And so it dissolved the question of who is that voice, and just let me know this is just the working of consciousness to help me to set on the path I need to be set on to go where I'm destined to go.
Yes, very good. Well, Jiffy, if for someone that's listening that is interested in being informed, being drawn to their path, what would you suggest to someone that's listening or watching and wants to go deeper in their own spiritual journey? What would you say to them?
I would say listen to your own internal knowing and pay attention. One thing I noticed is that I would find a sudden impulse to go into a bookstore that I was passing by and to just go to a specific shelf, and boom, there was my next book. And so pay attention to those impulses. For some people, it comes in other ways. It might be that there's a song playing on the radio that just happens to trigger some contemplative idea, and there you go deeper. And so listen to what your own particular channel is for being able to access guidance and that GPS system that I think we all have access to the extent that we're willing to attune to it.
Cool. Thank you for that. And Jiffy, for people that came late to the broadcast that want to make contact with you, how can they find you on the website or otherwise?
Yeah, I don't have a website. I don't have a body of work. I do have, let me see, I've got Jiffy Reed Aligned Living on Facebook, where there's some videos that I did, some live streams I did on the first couple chapters of Rupert's book on awareness. The nature of consciousness. People can reach out to me at jiffyreed@gmail.com, jiffyread@gmail.com. I welcome questions. I might not have time to answer right off the bat, but when people want to open up a dialogue with me and I find that they're struggling with something, I enjoy helping people on the spiritual path.
Thank you. Do you do any counseling, spiritual counseling, or?
I do spiritual counseling. I'm just about to go on vacation, so I'm taking a break from everything. But yes, I do spiritual counseling because I'm booked in my practice. I'm not taking many clients. I'm actually not taking any new clients now, but it's also, it's a rolling thing. When I work with someone for spiritual counseling, it's usually for just a couple of sessions. And so if someone's interested, you might catch me at a time when I'm available.
Okay, good, good. Okay, well, thank you for spending your time with us today on the Awareness Podcast, Jiffy. And thank you all for listening. I really enjoyed having you share your time with us. And thank you, Jiffy, for just an awesome time to talk and get to know each other, get to know some of your backstory. And it was total fun. I really loved it. Thank you.
Bill, as always, such a pleasure.